The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council sparkled under the light of 3 artificial suns. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy sat in rising circles around the central speaking platform. The air felt heavy with worry and fear. James Miller sat in the back row, trying to make himself as small as possible. As the only human representative in the hall, he had learned that staying quiet was usually his best option. The other races didn't care much for human opinions anyway. They called humans cowards behind their backs, and sometimes to their faces. The mechanical swarm has already destroyed 3 solar systems. Thunder Voice, the massive 4-armed Titan representative, slammed his fist on his desk. His gray skin turned almost black with anger. We must attack now. The crystalline form of High Speaker Bright Crystal rose from her seat, her body glowing with gentle blue light. The Luminars agree. Our warrior fleets stand ready. We have the strongest ships in the galaxy. We should strike before more worlds are lost. Miller watched as more representatives stood up, each prouder and louder than the last. The snake-like serpentians hissed their approval. The gas-form Cloudborn swirled in excitement. Even the usually calm tree walkers swayed their branch-like arms in agreement. But something felt wrong to Miller. He pulled out his data pad and looked at the reports again. The swarm wasn't just destroying worlds. It was learning from each attack, getting stronger, adapting. We will crush them with our might, Thunder Voice shouted. The Titan battle fleet will lead the charge. Miller couldn't stay quiet anymore. He pressed the speaker button on his desk. A small light appeared above his seat. The hall fell silent. Everyone turned to look at him, some with surprise, others with barely hidden disgust. The human wishes to speak. Bright Crystal's voice carried a hint of amusement, perhaps to tell us why we should hide instead of fight. A few laughs echoed through the hall. Miller stood up slowly, his plain black uniform standing out among the colorful and decorated outfits of the other representatives. I wish to share some data, he said quietly but clearly. His voice carried through the perfect acoustics of the hall. Our analysis shows that the swarm's behavior is changing. Each time it encounters resistance, it adapts its strategy. The 3rd system it destroyed. It took half the time it needed for the first one. All the more reason to strike now. Thunder Voice interrupted. Miller continued calmly. The swarm shows signs of artificial intelligence. It learns. It evolves. Charging in with brute force might teach it exactly how to defeat our strongest weapons. Are you suggesting we do nothing? A Serpentian representative's tongue flicked out in anger. Typical human cowardice. I'm suggesting we study it first, Miller replied. Learn its patterns, find its weaknesses, then strike in a way it can't adapt to. The hall erupted in angry shouts and dismissive gestures. Miller remained standing, his face calm despite the chaos around him. Bright Crystal raised her arms for silence. When the noise died down, she turned her crystalline form toward Miller. The humans' cautious approach is noted, but we are warriors. We do not hide and study while worlds burn. The combined fleets will attack in 3 days. Miller sat down as the hall filled with cheers and war cries. He typed a quick message on his pad, sending it to Admiral Thompson back on Earth. They won't listen. Prepare Operation Shadow Step. We might need it sooner than we thought. As the council meeting ended, representatives rushed out to prepare their war fleets. Miller walked slowly to his small ship, thinking about how many lives would be lost in the coming battle. He knew that sometime soon, these proud warriors would learn the hard way that there was more to courage than charging into battle. His ship's computer came to life as he sat in the pilot's seat. Message from Earth Command. Sir, it announced. Admiral Thompson says, keep watching. Keep learning. We'll be ready. Miller nodded as he started the launch sequence. Sometimes, he thought, the bravest thing you can do is be called a coward while doing what needs to be done. The small human ship slipped away from the council station, barely noticed among the massive warships gathering for battle. In 3 days, the proudest warriors in the galaxy would learn a hard lesson about the true nature of courage. if they survived to learn anything at all. 3 days passed quickly. The combined fleet of the warrior races gathered near the edge of the spiral arm, their ships gleaming under distant starlight. 5,000 warships formed a massive wall of metal and energy, the largest fleet assembled in the past 100 years. From his observation post in a small human scout ship, Miller watched the gathering forces with growing worry. The Titan dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, formed the center of the battle line. The crystalline ships of the Luminars sparkled on the flanks, their light-based weapons charging. The Serpentian strike craft slithered through space between larger vessels, while cloud-borne ships floated like ghostly fortresses in the background. Such a waste, Miller muttered, recording everything with his ship's sensors. His communication system crackled. All fleets, prepare for glory. Thunder Voice's booming words echoed through all channels. The enemy approaches. Today we show these mindless machines the power of true warriors. The mechanical swarm appeared at the edge of their sensors. It moved like a dark cloud through space, millions of small units working as one. But Miller noticed something the others missed. The swarm was moving differently now, more organized than in previous encounters. Fleet, advance, Thunder Voice commanded. For glory. The massive Allied fleet surged forward. Energy weapons blazed across space. Missiles streaked toward the swarm in burning lines. The first wave of attacks struck the edge of the swarm cloud and did almost nothing. Miller leaned forward in his seat, watching carefully. The swarm had changed. Where before it would have scattered under such an assault, now it held formation. The smaller units clustered together, forming shields that absorbed or deflected the attacks. Press the attack, Thunder Voice shouted, but there was a note of surprise in his voice. The Titan dreadnoughts fired their main guns, beams of energy so powerful they could crack planets. The swarm split apart, letting the beams pass harmlessly through empty space, then reformed instantly. Impossible, came the cry from the Luminar fleet as their light-based weapons reflected off newly developed mirror-like surfaces on the swarm units. Miller's sensors recorded everything as the battle turned into a disaster. The swarm didn't just defend, it attacked. It had learned from every previous encounter, adapted to every weapon used against it. Smaller units attached themselves to the hulls of warships, cutting through armor like it was paper. Larger swarm formations copied the energy signatures of Allied ships, causing confusion and friendly fire incidents. Fall back, Thunder Voice finally ordered, but it was too late for many ships. The proud Titan dreadnoughts, their armor being eaten away, retreated in disorder. Luminar vessels shattered under attacks perfectly designed to exploit the weaknesses of their crystalline structure. Serpentian ships found their superior maneuverability, matched and countered by swarm units that moved with impossible speed. Miller sent a continuous stream of data back to Earth as he watched the mighty fleet break apart. The warriors had expected to find a mindless enemy. Instead, they found one that had been studying them all along. "This is bright crystal to all ships." The Luminar leader's voice shook with disbelief. "Full retreat. Return to Council space immediately." The surviving ships fled, their retreat covered by desperate rearguard actions. The swarm pursued to the edge of the battle zone, then stopped, as if satisfied with its victory. Miller stayed behind, his small ship too insignificant for the swarm to bother with. He watched as it began to break down the debris of destroyed ships, adding their materials to its own mass. Miller to Earth Command. He transmitted, "Send all battle data to Admiral Thompson. The Council's attack failed, exactly as we predicted. The swarm has adapted to all their main weapons and tactics." He paused, watching the swarm's methodical movements. But they still haven't adapted to what they haven't seen. Operation Shadow Step is still viable. The response came quickly. "Understood. Continue observation. Admiral Thompson says your data is invaluable. The human fleet stands ready." As Miller watched the swarm slowly disperse, he thought about how the warrior races would react to this defeat. They would call for bigger ships, stronger weapons, more glorious charges. They still wouldn't understand. Sometimes the greatest victory comes not from being the strongest, but from being the smartest, and humanity was about to prove just how smart they could be. Admiral Kate Thompson stood in the center of Earth's Deep Space Command, surrounded by holographic displays showing the swarm's movement patterns. The room hummed with quiet activity as analysts studied data streaming in from Miller's observation ship. "Play it again," she ordered. "Slower this time." The hologram replayed the battle, showing the swarm's response to each weapon type. Thompson's gray eyes narrowed as she watched the swarm units adapt and change their formations. "Look at that," she pointed to a particular sequence. "The swarm doesn't just react. It predicts. These aren't random adaptations." Her second-in-command, Captain Robert Hayes, nodded. "Like it's running attack simulations before the weapons even hit. But every AI has basic operating protocols it can't break." "Exactly." Thompson smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but one of recognition. "The warrior races see a mindless enemy. We see a complex computer system. And all systems have rules they must follow." The doors slid open, and Miller walked in, looking tired after his long flight back from the battle. Thompson turned to him immediately. "Your observations were perfect," she said, "especially the post-battle data. The way it processes destroyed ships, that's the key." Miller straightened up despite his exhaustion. "You found something." Thompson waved her hand, and the holographic display changed to show the swarm's behavior after the battle. "It's not just copying our technology. It's following optimization protocols. It never wastes energy, never takes unnecessary risks. Everything it does serves a specific purpose. Like a computer trying to solve a problem in the most efficient way possible," Hayes added. "But that's its weakness." Thompson highlighted several patterns in the hologram. "It's so focused on efficiency that it's predictable. We don't need to overpower it. We need to give it a logic problem it can't solve efficiently." The room grew quiet as the implications sank in. While the warrior races were probably planning bigger weapons and stronger ships, humanity had found something much more valuable: a fundamental understanding of how their enemy thought. "The Council will never accept this approach," Miller said quietly. "They're too angry after their defeat. They'll want revenge, not strategy." Thompson's smile turned grim. "Then we don't ask for permission. Operation Shadow Step is ready. Our ships may be smaller and weaker than theirs, but we've designed them specifically for this mission." She brought up a new hologram showing the human fleet. Instead of massive warships, it showed smaller, sleeker vessels with minimal weapons. Ships designed not to fight, but to think. Each ship's AI is programmed to present different puzzles to the swarm, Hayes explained to Miller. "We'll make it waste energy solving problems that have no optimal solution. Like showing a chess computer a position where every move leads to a worse outcome." Miller nodded, understanding dawning on his tired face. Thompson turned to address the whole room. "The warrior races tried to defeat the swarm by being stronger. We'll defeat it by being smarter. Every ship will carry a different set of protocols, movements, and energy signatures. We'll give it so much data to process that it will have to slow down to analyze everything." She paused, looking at each person in the room. "They call us cowards because we don't charge blindly into battle. But understanding your enemy isn't cowardice, it's wisdom. And today, wisdom will accomplish what strength could not." "When do we begin?" Miller asked. "The fleet leaves in 6 hours," Thompson replied. "The Council's defeat has left 3 systems exposed. The swarm will move to consume them. But this time, instead of finding proud warriors, it will find quiet hunters." She looked back at the hologram of the swarm. "It thinks it's the perfect killing machine, adapting to overcome any obstacle. We'll show it what happens when the obstacle adapts faster than it does." As the room burst into activity, preparing for the mission, Miller watched the analysts at work. No battle cries, no boasts of glory, just careful, methodical preparation. The warrior races would never understand this kind of courage, the bravery it takes to face an overwhelming enemy with intelligence rather than force. But soon they would see the results, and perhaps then they would learn that sometimes the quietest warriors win the greatest victories. The emergency council meeting was even louder than the first one. The warrior races shouted over each other, their voices filled with anger and shame after their defeat. The Grand Hall's perfect acoustics amplified their rage. "We must build bigger weapons." Thunder Voice roared, all four arms gesturing wildly. "Stronger ships." "Our light cannons nearly penetrated their defenses," Bright Crystal argued. "If we double their power." "The humans request to speak." The quiet announcement cut through the noise like a knife. Every eye in the hall turned to where Miller stood, Admiral Thompson beside him. They hadn't even noticed the humans enter the chamber. "You dare come here with your cowardly suggestions," a Serpentian representative hissed. "After you refused to join our glorious battle." Thompson stepped forward, her simple uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate dress of the council members. "We come with a solution," she said, her voice calm but firm. "One that doesn't require a single new weapon." Laughter echoed through the hall, but it died quickly when Thompson activated a hologram in the center of the chamber. It showed the swarm's attack patterns from the recent battle. "The swarm isn't just a weapon," she explained. "It's a computer program. Complex, adaptive, but still bound by its core programming. We've spent weeks studying its behavior patterns." "Study, while worlds burn." Thunder Voice scoffed. "What good is knowledge against such power?" "Knowledge is power," Thompson replied. She zoomed in on specific parts of the battle. "Look here, and here. The swarm never wastes energy, never takes unnecessary risks. Every action serves a purpose. It's not trying to defeat us. It's trying to solve what it sees as an optimization problem." The hall grew quieter as she continued. "It adapts perfectly to direct attacks because that's an easily solvable problem. But what if we give it problems it can't solve efficiently?" "What exactly are you proposing?" Bright Crystal asked, her crystalline form dimming slightly in thought. "A small fleet, minimal weapons. Each ship programmed to present different puzzles to the swarm's intelligence. While it tries to optimize its response, we'll lead it into a trap of its own making." "A small fleet." Thunder Voice laughed again, but with less confidence. "Against a force that destroyed our mightiest ships." "Size isn't everything," Miller spoke up. "Sometimes the smallest key fits the largest lock." Thompson nodded. "We don't need your permission to try, but we do need you to not interfere. Give us one chance. If we fail, you can go back to building bigger weapons." The council chamber erupted in argument. The warrior races debated amongst themselves, their pride warring with their desperation. Finally, Bright Crystal raised her arms for silence. "The council has no choice," she announced. "Our fleets are damaged. Our weapons proved useless. We will allow the humans their attempt, though it goes against all our warrior traditions." "Thank you," Thompson said simply. She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. When you see what happens, remember, courage isn't about charging forward. Sometimes it's about stepping back and finding a better way." As they walked back to their ship, Miller glanced at Thompson. "They still think we're cowards." "Let them," she replied. "Their opinion doesn't change our mission. The fleet is ready. Yes, Captain Hayes has all ships in position. They're waiting for your signal." Thompson stopped at their ship's entrance and looked back at the council chamber. "They see cowardice because they don't understand. They think we're running away from the fight. But we're not," Miller said. "We're just fighting smarter." "Exactly." Thompson smiled. "Let them call us cowards. When this is over, they'll have to find a new word for what we are." Their small ship departed from the council station, joining the human fleet hidden in the shadow of a nearby moon. While the warrior races nursed their wounded pride, humanity prepared to show the galaxy a different kind of courage. The kind that comes not from the heart or the muscle, but from the mind. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge of his ship, watching the swarm approach on long-range sensors. Around his small vessel, 30 human ships moved in perfect formation, each one carrying a different set of programs designed to confuse and misdirect the mechanical enemy. "All ships, execute Pattern Alpha," he ordered quietly. "Remember your training. No heroics. No glory. Just the plan." The human fleet split into 5 groups, each taking a different approach vector to the swarm. Their ships were tiny compared to the Council's war vessels, looking more like shadows than warships. "Swarm is responding," his sensor officer reported. "They're hesitating." Hayes nodded. This was exactly what Thompson had predicted. The swarm's computers were detecting multiple small threats, each behaving differently. It had to analyze each group separately, spending precious processing power. "Begin Phase 2, Hayes commanded. "Launch the drones." Hundreds of small drones deployed from the human ships, each programmed with a different set of movements and energy signatures. Some acted like damaged chips, others like automated weapons. A few mimicked the power signatures of the Council's warships. The swarm's response was immediate but confused. It started breaking into smaller groups, trying to deal with multiple threats at once. Every time it adapted to one pattern, the human ships and drones would switch to another. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "Admiral Thompson is ready with Group 3. "Right on schedule," Hayes smiled. "Begin the retreat. Make it look good." The human ships turned and fled, but not in panic. Each movement was calculated, designed to draw portions of the swarm in different directions. The mechanical enemy followed, splitting its forces further as it chased what it thought were easy targets. "The swarm is dividing," the sensor officer reported. 37 distinct groups now. Their coordination is dropping. Hayes watched as the plan unfolded. The swarm, programmed to find optimal solutions, was being forced to solve dozens of different problems simultaneously. Its collective intelligence was stretching thin, trying to adapt to too many situations at once. "Admiral Thompson's group is in position," communications announced. "She's starting the pulse sequence." From their hiding place behind a small moon, Thompson's ships began broadcasting complex energy patterns. To the swarm, it looked like a new weapon being deployed. Its programming forced it to analyze and adapt to this potential threat, spreading its processing power even thinner. "Look at that," Hayes pointed to the main display. The swarm units were starting to move erratically, some even colliding with each other. "They're overloading, can't process everything at once." The human fleet continued its complex dance, each ship and drone following its programmed pattern perfectly. No two units moved the same way or presented the same puzzle to the swarm's computers. "Sir," energy spike from the center of the swarm. Hayes leaned forward. "This is it. All ships, execute final pattern. Precise timing. People." The human fleet moved as one, each group closing in on their designated targets. The swarm, its collective intelligence overwhelmed by too many variables, couldn't coordinate an effective response. Some units tried to attack, others attempted to defend, and many simply froze in place. "The swarm's network is collapsing," the sensor officer reported excitedly. "They can't maintain coherent control." Hayes watched as the mighty swarm, which had destroyed the Council's most powerful warships, began to break apart. Without its coordinated intelligence, the individual units were just machines, dangerous but no longer an unstoppable force. Message from Admiral Thompson. Communications called out. "Operation Shadow Step successful. Begin containment procedures." The human ships moved in, their small size now an advantage as they herded the confused swarm units into predetermined zones. Special containment fields, designed to trap and isolate the mechanical enemies, sprang up around the separated groups. "Send word to the Council," Hayes ordered. "Tell them." He paused, thinking of the warrior races and their mockery of human caution. "Tell them the cowards send their regards." As his crew worked to secure their victory, Hayes reflected on how they had achieved what the mightiest warriors couldn't. Not with power or glory, but with patience, planning, and the courage to think differently. Sometimes the biggest victories come from the smallest ships, and the quietest warriors win the greatest battles. Admiral Thompson stood before the Galactic Council again. But this time the hall was silent. No shouts, no mockery, just stunned attention as the holographic display showed the captured swarm units floating harmlessly in their containment fields. "Impossible," Thunder Voice whispered, all four arms hanging limp at his sides. "You defeated them, with tiny ships and simple programs." "We defeated them by understanding them," Thompson replied. She gestured to the display, showing how the swarm had broken apart. "Every computer system has limits. Push those limits too far, and the system fails." Bright crystal's crystalline form pulsed with curious light. "Show us again how you did it." Thompson nodded to Miller, who stepped forward and adjusted the hologram. It now showed the human fleet's complex dance around the swarm, each ship and drone following its unique pattern. "The swarm was designed to find perfect solutions," Thompson explained. "When faced with a direct attack, it could focus all its processing power on one problem. But we gave it too many problems at once, none of them with a perfect solution. Like trying to solve 1,000 puzzles simultaneously," Miller added, "while each puzzle keeps changing its rules." The council members watched as the replay showed the swarm's coordinated intelligence breaking down. Some leaned forward in their seats, warriors finally understanding the elegance of the strategy. "But your ships," a Serpentian representative began. "They had almost no weapons. If the swarm had attacked directly." "That's why we didn't give them the chance," Thompson smiled. "We knew we couldn't win by being stronger, so we won by being smarter." Hayes stepped up beside her, adding to the explanation. Each ship was programmed to present a different type of threat. The swarm couldn't ignore any of them because its basic protocols required it to analyze every potential danger. And while it was busy analyzing, Miller continued, it couldn't maintain its network coordination. A mind, even an artificial one, can only focus on so many things at once. Thunder Voice stood slowly, his massive frame casting a shadow across the chamber floor. We were wrong about humans." The words seemed to pain him, but he forced them out. "We called you cowards because you would not charge blindly into battle. But this," he gestured at the hologram, "this took a different kind of courage. The courage to think," Bright Crystal added, her voice thoughtful. "To plan. To risk being called cowards while pursuing the right path." Thompson looked around the grand hall, meeting the eyes of each council member. Courage isn't just about facing physical danger. Sometimes it's about facing ridicule and doubt, about standing firm when everyone tells you you're wrong. The hologram shifted to show the contained swarm units. "We didn't defeat this enemy with strength of arms, but with strength of mind. Not with the courage to die gloriously, but with the courage to live carefully and strike wisely." A low murmur spread through the hall as the council members discussed among themselves. Finally, Bright Crystal rose, her crystalline form glowing brightly. "The council acknowledges humanity's victory," she announced formally. "And more than that, we acknowledge our error. We mistook prudence for cowardice, wisdom for weakness. Today, humans have taught the galaxy a valuable lesson about the true nature of courage." As the council members rose to applaud, Miller leaned close to Thompson. "Think they've really learned their lesson?" Thompson watched as Thunder Voice approached, all four arms extended in a gesture of respect. "Maybe not all of them, not completely, but they've seen something today they can't unsee. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't charging forward. It's taking a step back to find a better way," Hayes finished quietly. The human team stood together as the council chamber filled with representatives eager to learn more about their strategy. The warrior races might still love their glorious charges and mighty weapons, but they had seen today that there was more than one way to show courage. And sometimes the greatest victories come not from the strength to fight, but from the wisdom to think. 1 month after humanity's victory over the swarm, the Galactic Council looked very different. The Grand Hall had been rearranged, with human representatives now seated among the front rows instead of the back. But more than the seating had changed. Miller watched as Admiral Thompson presented the final report on the contained swarm units. The warrior races that once mocked humans now listened carefully to every word. The swarm's core programming has been fully analyzed, Thompson explained, standing confidently at the center of the hall. With this knowledge, we can prevent similar threats from emerging in the future. And you did this without destroying them? Asked a young Titan representative, his tone curious rather than critical. Even after they caused so much destruction. Destruction isn't always the answer, Thompson replied. Sometimes understanding your enemy is more valuable than destroying them. Captain Hayes stepped forward with a new holographic display. We've modified some of the captured units to serve as an early warning system. They can detect and alert us to any similar AI patterns emerging in our space. The council chamber, once filled with boasts of battle prowess, now buzzed with technical questions and thoughtful discussions. Warriors who had proudly displayed their battle scars now showed equal pride in understanding complex defense strategies. Humanity has changed how we view warfare, Bright Crystal announced, her crystalline form glowing warmly. The Council proposes a new defense initiative. Each race will contribute not just warriors, but thinkers. Not just weapons, but ideas. Thunder Voice, who had once been humanity's loudest critic, stood to address the chamber. My people have already begun adapting our training programs. Strength without wisdom is just brute force. We learned this lesson the hard way. Miller smiled as he remembered the mockery humans had faced just weeks ago. Now the same races that had called them cowards were asking for human instructors to teach strategic thinking and analytical combat. The galaxy is changing, Thompson said quietly to her team. And for once, it's not changing because of who had the biggest weapons. A Serpentian representative raised his head. But what happens when we face an enemy that cannot be outthought? When brute force is needed? Then we use brute force, Hayes replied simply. The point isn't that fighting is wrong. It's about choosing the right tool for each challenge. Sometimes that's a weapon. Sometimes it's a clever plan. Thompson nodded. Courage comes in many forms. The courage to fight. The courage to wait. The courage to think differently when everyone tells you you're wrong. The truly brave warrior knows when to use each type. The council session concluded with a historic announcement. The warrior races would maintain their strength, but they would also build centers of strategic study. The humans who had been mocked as cowards would help teach a new generation of warriors to balance power with wisdom. As the chamber emptied, Miller found himself walking beside Thunder Voice. The massive Titan looked down at him thoughtfully. You knew, didn't you? Thunder Voice asked. Even in that first meeting, when we laughed at your warnings. You knew we were wrong. Miller shrugged. We knew there was a better way. The hard part wasn't finding it. It was having the courage to stick to it when everyone called us cowards. That, Thunder Voice rumbled, is a lesson my people will not forget. Later, on the observation deck of the council station, Thompson stood with her team, watching ships from all races coming and going peacefully. So, Hayes asked, was it worth all the mockery? All the doubts? Thompson smiled. Look out there. The warrior races aren't just stronger now. They're wiser. They've learned that sometimes the greatest courage is the courage to think differently. Miller nodded. And the next time a threat appears, the galaxy will face it with both strength and wisdom. Thompson finished. Not bad for a bunch of cowards, right? They laughed together, these humans who had changed the galaxy not through force of arms, but through force of mind. They had proven that true courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about facing challenges with wisdom, patience, and determination. The stars shone brightly outside the window, seeming to approve of this new understanding. In the end, it wasn't the mighty warriors who had saved the galaxy. It was the cowards who dared to be wise.